So that was a signal for me to say, okay, I need to get the heck out of here. Otherwise.
Okay. Should we start? Because it's already 5:30 and people will join in.
Sure.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Between the Lines. My name is Advait Kurlekar. My colleague here is Eklavya Malhotra, and we represent a management consulting company based in Pune called Upohan. There are many people who have been part of Between the Lines journey for the last several years now. But for those who are new to this program, we have been doing this sessions called Between the Lines each month. In fact, today is session number 60. And every month we identify a book that we believe is a good book to read. And obviously every book has insights. So what happens is Eklavya, into bracket, hopefully reads the book several times and presents a summary of that book to all of us here. So without reading the book, we know what the book talks about. So it's like, watching a trailer of a movie and making a choice whether you want to see the movie or not later. So you can pick up the book if you want to later. And every book obviously has insights and inspiration and learnings. And therefore, depending on the topic, we invite people from the industry and I moderate a panel discussion on the topic. So normally the discussion is never on the book, but on the topic that emanates from the book that we have chosen. We have been fortunate to have partnered with NHRDN, National HRD Network, All India Network, as well as our local chapter in Pune for many of these events, nearly 2.5 years now for many of these events, and we are grateful to them for this partnership. So the format of this event is that very soon I will hand over the proceedings to my colleague Eklavya, who will take us through the book summary. That will go on for maybe about 25-30 minutes. And then I'll come back. I will formally introduce our panelists to all of you. And then I'll start the discussion with them on the topic of HR next practices. So once again, thanks for sparing your time on a Friday evening. And, and thanks panelists for sparing your time as well. And I'll come back again with the formal introduction, of course. So over to you, Eklavya, for the book summary.
Thank you, Advait. I'll just share the screen. Okay, so the topic that we've chosen for this month's session is HR next practices, emphasis being on the word next. And hopefully over the course of the next 1.5 hours or so, what we will learn from our panelists will be a handy playbook in terms of what could be the next practices when it comes to winning this war for talent, as it is popularly known. So let's get right into the book that we've chosen for setting the context for the subsequent panel discussion. So this time, what we've taken is something very different for us also. We normally do not pick up books that are more of, compendiums of articles that have been compiled together or that have been curated. But this time we really were, thinking of taking some book which is as topical as it gets. So we really wanted something which had been published in the last couple of months itself. And we wanted a particular book, which is specifically talking about, what war for talent probably means now in this, mid-COVID kind of a scenario. And we were fortunate enough that after extensive search, we actually managed to zone in on this particular book, which is actually written, or it has been compiled by a think tank called, I think, the Global Institute for Thought Leadership. And essentially, it features 11 prominent, preeminent writers, consultants, CEOs, board members who are part of this illustrious think tank. And they've come together and they have penned their individual thoughts on various topics, various facets that help decode what exactly could be, those critical factors that will help an organization, that will help a business navigate this, war for talent, as it is popularly known. Now, this word itself, this phrase war for talent, let's agree that this is pretty much jargon, and we really cannot equate it to a real war of sorts. But if you think about it, one of the ways in which you can actually draw some parallels or analogies to an actual war, that most wars are actually fought over scarce resources or resources that are going to be in, great demand. So in that way, if you look at it, while people might say that there is an oversupply of employees available in the market, there is a proliferation of people in the job market hunting for the right jobs, but there is a real scarcity of available talent. So to that extent, talent is indeed a very valuable commodity right now. And so to some extent, we can probably agree that yes, there is something like a war for talent that is ongoing. And like I think there was one very beautiful passage in the book which said that you cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. So whether we like it or not, we are in the midst of this battle, the struggle to gain the topmost talent. And if you don't take steps today, you're really going to be, rendered more or less weaponless when it comes to tomorrow. So that's what we are, basically looking at understanding through this particular book. And what makes the book slightly different from many other books that have been written on this topic is that it actually explores this whole area of talent through various different angles, through, different lenses. And that kind of, unveils various opportunities or insights. I think that's the key word, insights, behind this somewhat simplistic term that we use, talent. So there are different, like everybody brings a different perspective to the table. And that's what, this book kind of leads us towards, that you can look at the same thing, which is talent, from different, sort of like a myriad of ways, and then find your own kind of North Star, what agrees with you. So the book is definitely not prescriptive in nature. It just lays down certain viewpoints. And then, of course, you're free to make your own choices and decisions. But one thing that comes out really strong throughout these 11 insights or these 11 articles that have been compiled together is that there is a struggle. There's a real struggle out there for acquiring talent. And the struggle is now getting to that survivalist stage. It's getting to that existential stage. If you don't have talent, if you don't have top draw talent now, your organization's existence itself can come under the scanner. So war doesn't have to be a brutally fought war with a lot of sacrifices, but nonetheless, this kind of a war for talent does mean that you need to be prepared. You need to have, different options ahead of you, different approaches, and that's what essentially this book outlines for our reference. Now, let's take it step by step. We'll just go through a few of them. I don't think we'll have time to go through each of these. But the first insight that has been propounded over here is that you need to invent jobs that don't exist right now if you want to attract and retain talent. Now, what the author for this particular piece states is that first and foremost, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this whole thing of talent being scarce? So there are three clear reasons that seem to come out. One is that increasingly specialization, job specialization, role specialization is widening this talent gap. And also, earlier, what used to pretty much seal the deal when it came to acquiring or retaining talent, it no longer seems to be sufficient. That means money is no longer the ultimate sweetener. And lastly, globalization has obviously made the world way more complex. It's pretty amazing that if you think about it right now, like earlier, we would look at only our local areas, our local cities, for recruitment purposes. But now that the world is truly your oyster, your perfect candidate might be, thousands of kilometers away, but yet be close enough to join your team tomorrow itself. So that's how the impact has been of, these 2 or 3 points. And that's what brings it to, this whole thing of how do you now, if you want to attract and retain talent in this kind of increasingly difficult, work environment, or rather difficult world environment, you need to invent jobs that don't exist yet. So what does that really mean? Now, essentially, what this person is saying is that he uses this as an icebreaker. So he gives his own experience. He was once invited to speak at this company called the American Greetings Company. So they are basically one of the largest, greeting card publishers in America. And he was asked to deliver a keynote address over there on I think, creative thinking or creative writing to many of their artists, graphic designers, copywriters, and whatnot. Now, he was greeted with a very pleasant surprise when he walked into the headquarters, because he saw that, right in the foyer or the reception of American Greetings head office, he noticed that they had these huge, giant glass display cases all over the floor. And these were filled with various, items which did not really make any sense when you looked at, when you look at them holistically. There were things like paintings, there were, things like sculptures, there were wood carvings, figurines, somebody, like there were clothes, there were embroidered clothes, there was junk jewelry, artifacts of various nature. So a lot of artistic creations, but none of it really seemed to make sense to him. So he asked the receptionist that, what exactly is all of this? She replied that these are all created by the employees, and these are actually their hobbies, their personal interest areas, and we like to showcase it once they create something, once they develop something. So the author was naturally quite stunned by this, and not just by the quality of work, which was pretty good, but more importantly, by the company's thought process. The fact that they were not really putting out their own greeting cards or any of their own merchandise to display in their corporate headquarters, but they were acknowledging that their employees had a life outside of the workplace, and they probably had something which excited them way more than even the job, and they felt compelled enough to celebrate these little achievements or these little indulgences of their employees. Because again, he sort of juxtaposes this with another organization which was slightly less secure, maybe, or a less open, less embracing organization, which was one of US government's largest agencies. So he was delivering yet another similar kind of a seminar or address to the employees of that particular government agency's headquarters in Washington, DC. And over there, he decided that he'd start off with one of his patented icebreakers, which really works well. So he said to everybody that, tell me about your fantasy job. What job is it that really sort of, pulls you out? And it doesn't even have to be a real job. It can be something that is totally made up. But just talk about what a fantasy job would look like for you. And the employees really loved it. People came up with some outlandish ideas, like somebody wanted to be a tour guide on Mars, these kind of things. But after all of this, the boss, the head honcho over there in that government agency, he took aside this person, this consultant, and he actually admonished him and said that, why would you even allow them to think that they could have a better job than what they have right now? And that's when, he kind of sort of lost faith in doing this icebreaker again. But after some time, like just before COVID, he was conducting another similar session with an online retail company. And over there, he decided that, okay, these guys seem to be a little more chilled out, a little more relaxed. So he decided to do it again. And this time again, it was a huge hit. People loved it. People really sort of, came out with some, really wild and wacky ideas. Like somebody wanted to be an international restaurant taster. Somebody wanted to be a gypsy. Somebody wanted to, go out there and build a foster home for little kittens and puppies and whatnot. So what he realized was that, what's probably puts good organizations apart from the not so good ones when it comes to the talent practices in terms of acknowledging talent, is that they recognize that talent is just, they're just cogs in that organizational wheel, and they have a life beyond the workplace also. They are unique, and they have certain passions which you need to acknowledge, and you need to then continuously create some kind of a work environment which attracts and inspires the best of talent. So he started researching on this further, and he's actually spent a lot of months in the last year working this out with somebody at IBM who is basically responsible for creating future careers at IBM. So the two of them collaborated, and they basically have come out with this with this kind of a workshop or a product called Inventing Future Careers. Now, what he does, and this is what he states at length in this particular chapter of the book, is that they use a very unique or word combination technique. I think it's called semantic intuition or something like that. And what they do is that it's basically a step-by-step process. So like the example that he gives is that first and foremost, you need to give the entire, if you're doing this with an employee base, you give them three categories. You give them three categories. So three phrases you give them. So like the example that he gives is you give them leading or cutting edge technologies. You give them the word industries and you give them the word designation. And now you ask people, again, this can be applied to prospective employees at the time of recruitment or current employees at the time of developing their career plans, development plans. You ask people to select words randomly from this laundry list. These are just three categories. Under this, you need to list out a number of things. Like under cutting edge technologies, you could have things like blockchain, Internet of Things, crypto, then machine learning, AI, all these kind of things. Industries could include, architecture, management consulting, tourism, writing. And when it comes to designations, it could be things like, manager, CEO, coach, strategy consultant, something like business analyst. So you give them like a full laundry list. And then you ask people to randomly combine words from these three categories to create some kind of a new career. So like, for instance, using these three categories of cutting edge technologies, industries, and designations, maybe somebody can come up with something like, Internet of Things, healthcare, strategy consultant. So you use these word combinations to create an entirely new job field or entirely new career. And then that's where the skill of the HR comes into play, which is that how do you use these kind of new job titles, new careers that people create using this kind of wordplay in terms of creating or curating customized learning plans, and also to understand what really sets apart one person from the other, what could be the drivers for their own individual behavior. So this whole Inventing Future Careers exercise is the first insight which they have shared in the book, which they feel can be a real source of attracting and retaining talent going forward. Now, the other thing is on a very lighter note, they talk about understanding or decoding playful productivity. Now, these two words are obviously very paradoxical. Playful and productivity normally don't go hand in hand. And the way in which the writer for this piece explains this hypothesis is by giving us the examples of two movies. The first movie is that Tom Cruise movie, which was based on the John Grisham book, The Firm. And the other is slightly more recent one, which is the Robert De Niro, Anne Hathaway movie, The Intern. And then, they actually draw a lot of parallels in terms of, like, if you watch the movie The Firm, the talent over there, which is Tom Cruise, the young lawyer, is being lured by various law firms with all kinds of, monetary perks, like some X $1,000 per year, joining bonuses. Then as a basketball fan, you get like front row stadium seats, arena seats. And also by telling him that, we only want you to clock in 50 hours a week. So we are like, the best among all the law firms in this area. We want you to have a life outside the job. So again, but it all boils down to the compensation part of it, the money part of it. And if you look at, the other movie, which they then go on to analyze, which is The Intern, over there, everything seems much lighter. Everything is more about finding the joy in work and in the workplace. There's nothing about, money being thrown at people. These are young people who are not really coming to office wearing expensive suits and really dressing up for the job. Maybe the movie probably features more of millennials or the millennial culture at least. So again, that movie is full of very sort of lovely, fluffy moments where it's more about generational clash, but shared humanity. And what he's trying to say is that productivity can come from both these angles. Productivity can come from both these approaches, but compensation will definitely not be enough because culture has clearly trumped compensation. And the whole idea that can you create a workplace where everything is very light and friendly? Now, this exactly is what they're calling playful productivity, which is normally an opposite, but the result of this, sort of merger of two words can be quite outstanding. So what they're talking about is building a culture where both playfulness and productivity go hand in hand. So that whole thing of work hard, play hard, they talk about that culture being the one which will really help you succeed in this war for talent. And one of the examples that they give, without getting into too many of the other examples, one of the best examples they give is that can you create an organizational culture where you kill the use of normative language, where you don't use sentences or where you don't respond to people by saying that I'm not listening to this idea, or this is never going to work, so let's not even discuss it, or we have a way of doing things, so let's do things properly. Instead of that, can we replace it with more affirmative or less normative statements like, do you think we can try it like this? Or use words like maybe instead of no. So they give an example of an organization which seemingly has really imbibed this, and their results in terms of engagement and retention are pretty much through the roof. So this whole thing is that playful productivity can actually be a real kind of an like an arrow in your quiver when it comes to winning the war for talent, but only after you understand how to balance this delicate thing between playfulness, keeping things light, keeping things friendly, and at the same time not allowing productivity to take a dip. The other thing which we are probably seeing a lot more in the last decade or so is employer branding. And they're not just limiting it to employer branding. The recommendation over here is that you should brand your company with a book. Now, this is something which is, again, it's actually similar to having that kind of belief in your favorite sports team, even though they don't seem to win anything. So it's like, if you're a fan of the IPL team, Royal Challengers Bangalore, they probably really get the branding so perfect that people are staunch supporters of the team, even though they don't have a single trophy to show over all these years. But yet the branding really seems to work well for some reason. So the author tries to put forth that wouldn't it be interesting if companies start adopting similar approaches where the branding really sort of, takes a front seat. So again, what they talk about is that, of late, there are many such notable books that have been written, like a few that you see over here. And people, especially the millennials, they want to work for companies with a compelling mission. And moreover, I think this is something which we all can attest, we all can attest to the fact that we all love to hear or read or watch the origin stories of people, whether it is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or whether it is somebody like Phil Knight, the iconic founder of Nike. We really want to know that how did Nike become the brand that it is today? We really want to understand, that, okay, so Nike faced so many challenges. They had FBI investigations against them. They had constant cash flow problems until maybe the turn of the century. And you really want to know, like, okay, how did somebody like the late Tony Hsieh, how did he create this iconic company which really not just talks about customer happiness or customer obsession, but really seems to be delivering it. So they talk about this book thing, the book concept. They say that a book, employer branding with a book, has to read like a manifesto or a statement of your company values. So it has to be. In fact, they are aggressively suggesting that it should be like a propaganda-esque kind of piece, because they feel that that's what really draws attention to your employer brand. And that is probably what will really sort of attract like-minded people to come and work for you. The minute you've managed to overcome that barrier, or the minute you've managed to surmount that seemingly impossible barrier of getting like-minded people to work for you, then obviously it's a walk in the park, more or less, when it goes to retaining that, that set of people. So this manifesto thing is something which they really focus on, and even at the cost of, making it sound like a political statement, they feel that yes, it should be like that. That's precisely what your brand building business book needs to be. Then one of the other ones, which is, obviously like a no-brainer, is that technology, or rather the newer technologies, are going to increase the this war for talent, or it's at least going to expedite this entire struggle, the pace at which it is taking place. And I think we've all heard and read enough about these things. But the one thing that really stood out for me, at least, was that, again, the fact that this was written in a COVID environment. I think one of the best things that this piece spoke about was that this whole thing of virtual work management, where is it really going to hit you? It's going to hit you hardest in the sense that your managers will now need to take on the role of facilitators primarily. They will need to basically play the role of a facilitator rather than managers. And for that, you will really need to harness technology for defining objectives better, and also for trying to achieve more acceptable or desirable outcomes. But this whole thing about that new technologies will place a real strong kind of stress on the managerial cadre who are used to managing but who are not used to facilitating. I think that's something which was slightly different or off the normal track. Then one of the very, I think this is again something which gets increasingly spoken about, especially when it comes to making your purpose work for you. So you need to define the why and how of purpose when it comes to winning this war for talent. So again, this goes back to what Simon Sinek also has written extensively about, or like we talk about putting purpose to work. So purpose is obviously organizational purpose. You need to figure out a way in which how to make it personal and emotional. At the same time, it should provide some sense of pride or motivation for everybody who's associated within the organization. And we obviously, I think we spend about 1/3 of our waking lives at work. And now when it's more of remote work, we seem to be living at work instead. So it's a very fine, thin line. And that is something, which again, when they talk about it, that in today's scenario, and again, this kind of, remote working scenario, what do you need to do? So one of the things that they talk about is that you need to, first and foremost, as an organization, you need to walk the talk by making purpose-driven strategic choices. So an example of this, a brilliant example of this that they've talked about in the book is CVS. So CVS Health, the US drugs and pharmacy chain, they basically showcase what making a purpose-driven strategic choice looks like. A few years ago, they became the first US drugstore pharmacy chain which stopped or which banned the sale of tobacco products and cigarettes. And this is all because, their mission statement spoke about the focus on health, and obviously selling cigarettes and tobacco is pretty much contradictory to that. So this also entailed a real revenue sacrifice and profit hit. They lost over $2 billion annually in terms of the lost cigarette sales only. But they refused to budge from that stance. And this really led to people rallying around the company. This led to unprecedented dip in the attrition levels. And more employees started contributing more and more ideas in terms of how do you support the no smoking or stop smoking campaigns that CVS is now known for. And this shows that the purpose-driven strategy which really pays off in the long run. But obviously, it means that you really need to have the gumption to take a strategic choice. The second thing what they talk about is that you need to measure what matters, because you can do the why part of it, but the how is also important for individuals, for teams. So again, the example that they use over here is OKRs, objectives and key results, which are pretty fantastic for goal setting, goal alignment. And it can be really transformational if it is implemented properly, because it fosters collaboration like nothing else. And they give the examples of, I think, Google, LinkedIn, Spotify, Zynga Games, Deloitte, and a host of other companies which have really embraced the OKR philosophy. And in fact, Eric Schmidt, I think, once famously said that OKRs have to be credited with changing the course of Google's fortunes forever. So the question that we need to reflect on is, how do team members in our organization align with the purpose? If we have defined the why, then how are the team members aligning to that why? And then lastly, in terms of, that, okay, what you also need to look at is embracing a growth mindset, which means that you need to make these purpose-driven choices, you need to measure what matters, and then you need to tell stories. Organizations need to celebrate more stories which showcase how the culture is really being practiced or being demonstrated in action. So at what levels do organizations really capture purpose stories or culture stories? And how can you make that more impactful? If you can answer these questions, then the why and how, that part really gets taken care of. Then another one that they write extensively about is about well-being. Well-being being the cornerstone of talent management strategies. Again, more important now than it was earlier because of the kind of toll that everybody's mental well-being has taken over the last 18 months or so. And over here, they give like a 5-step kind of a path. So it talks about that if you take care of employee well-being, it reflects in the kind of culture that you've built. The right kind of culture will reflect in the employee experience that people enjoy. The right employee experience will lead to higher levels of employee engagement, which ultimately, hopefully, will lead to sustainable business results. So that's the kind of, that's the kind of connection that they show. And when we talk about well-being, that also they've divided it into 4 areas, 4 broad areas, like the physical environment itself, which is the workplace, the quality of your workplace, the physical infrastructure, culture, which is, the ritualistic behaviors, norms that the organization follows. It can be a positive culture, it can be a toxic culture. Then they talk about job design, which is quite often not discussed as much. But at the very basic level, it includes things like parity in compensation, job security, role clarity. And lastly, management systems, which means how does the management communicate? Is there effective communication, within the organization? What do you do in terms of giving feedback or receiving feedback? And what are the opportunities for growth and professional or personal development? So taking all this into account is what is well-being. It's not just physical or mental, but it's slightly more comprehensive than that. And then finally, the last one that we'll touch upon is something which is again slightly different, not the usual things that we talk about or that we hear about when we come across the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this, of course, has been done to death. Now people are calling it hyper VUCA world, because while there is VUCA outside, we are also dealing with external, what we call the pestle forces that are seemingly at play right now. And they really seem to be attacking us from all angles, from all sides. So what are you supposed to do as a leader? What role should the leader have when it comes to keeping organizations, still kind of aligned to the purpose when you are navigating through this hyper VUCA world? So they've come up with something which is, it's like a kind of an antonym of VUCA, what they call CCSC, which stands for calm, certain, simple, and clear. So VUCA, the antidote for VUCA is CCSC. So volatility, you need to meet volatility with calmness. So again, as a leader, yes, there is a lot of stress in this kind of an environment. There's a lot of frustration and sometimes anger or resentment also. But a leader, a good leader, will find a way to create some kind of a sense of urgency rather than continue to foster that panic state. And instead of striking a match beneath people or under people, an effective leader would rather find a way to light a fire within them, which will hopefully motivate them or goad them into action. So that's volatility versus calmness. Uncertainty has to be tackled with certainty. And things are uncertain. In such a situation, all that you know is that you definitely know nothing. But it is part of the leader's job to at least, even while you're figuring out the answers for yourself, you need to still figure out a way to lead. That's probably one of the most important things, that in a VUCA world also, leaders should not forget that they still need to lead. So then complexity has to be, again, negated with simplicity. So you have to make things as simple as possible, but like I think Albert Einstein put it, while you're making things as simple as possible, do not make them simpler than that. That is probably one of the more one of the most profound statements that he is credited with. And that's again, that instead of thinking outside the box, which we all claim to do, when there is a complex situation, do you have the leadership ability and skills to think inside the box? That's something which, again, is questionable most of the time. And finally, when it comes to ambiguity, you need to counter that with clarity. So that, clarity means giving people that sense of hope, that sense of, that there is going to be a day at the end of this night. And interestingly enough, the way they put it, that you need to, as a good leader, you need to look through the telescope. And at the same time, sometimes you need to look through the microscope. So when it comes to ambiguity meeting clarity, this telescope versus microscope approach, this is something which is, it pretty much sums up what they're trying to talk about when it comes to this VUCA world and people needing to do the opposite. So that brings us to the end of a brief summary of this book. And finally, of course, if you look at it, the war for talent is already over, and it's pretty clear who has emerged triumphant. And quite honestly, all we can do right now is play catch up. And if this book or these kind of insights help you, play catch up with this, in this war for talent or this race for talent, then it has served its purpose. And to further elaborate on this, we move on to the main feature of today's session, the panel discussion. Thank you, everyone. I'm Eklavya Malhotra, and over to Advait now.
Thanks, Eklavya, as always, for a wonderful, succinct kind of summary of that book. Many things to talk about, and I look forward to hearing from our panelists today. So it gives me great pleasure in formally introducing our panelists to all of you today. Starting up with, just because he's in a nice, lovely shirt today, I'm bringing up first, Dr. Deepak Gupta. He's currently client partner in Conferry, based in Gurgaon or Gurugram office. He's been more than 30 years as an HR consultant, and obviously has huge experience as far as leadership assessment, succession planning, HR strategy, OD, and the organization restructuring is concerned across different countries. He's worked in India and UAE. His clients are all over the world, and the other time job, I think the weekend job, he is obviously an avid biker and a full-fledged, certified wood carver. So that's the kind of colorful personality that we have in Dr. Deepak Gupta, or DG as we fondly call him. So thanks, DG, for taking your time out on a Friday evening, and welcome to Between the Lines. Joining him is our own Arvind Ladha. He's the CEO of Mercer India, and Mercer, of course, needs no introduction. Thanks to all the uncertainties and the VUCA things that Eklavya has talked about in the book. Although he's based in Mumbai, he currently happens to be in Pune, and I met up with him a couple of weeks ago, and it was a great meeting that we had on a weekend. But Arvind comes with a huge experience in terms of wealth management, data analytics, employee benefit kind of sectors. And he was working on his own as an entrepreneur. He became one of the India's leading kind of EB and insurance kind of companies, which got merged or taken over by JLT. He served on that board as well. And now, last couple of years, he's the India CEO for Mercer. So again, huge experience, and like Conferry, like Mercer, these companies and therefore their heads don't need any further kind of introduction. So thanks, Arvind, for taking your time out, and welcome to Between the Lines. And last but not the least, joining in very late, close past 8:30 p.m. local time, where he's based, is Anil Agnihotri, the Talent and OD Director at Faurecia, Clarion Electronics. He's currently based in Shanghai. Again, he's in a way a Puneite because he's from IMDR, Pune's first management school. He has over 17 years experience in variety of roles, I think in Thermax, in SKF, and now for many years in Faurecia, where he's overseeing the regional practice for them for talent management and OD. So thanks, Anil, for sparing your not Friday evening, but perhaps now creeping into the night from Shanghai, and welcome to Between the Lines. Have we lost Anil?
Yeah, I think he dropped out. He had frozen in between.
Okay.
It's probably dropped out.
Let's hope he comes back soon. Maybe if I may, I'll start with you, DG. And 30 odd years in HR consulting in different clients all over the world. You worked in India and Middle East. One question that I had is, when we talk of this VUCA world, and of course we want to talk of next practices, of all the things HR does in terms of different, functions of HR, in your huge experience of 30 years, what do you think has changed the most? And what do you think has not changed at all? Or maybe it's not going to be possible to say at all, but has changed the least? And then the leading question to that is, therefore, how does this then segue into the next practice kind of discussion for HR?
Ouch. You put me on a spot. That's a difficult one. And I'm not saying it because like an opening remark, but it is. But let me give it a shot. And cliched as this may sound, I think the one statement that we continue to hear is sort of the need for HR to become more relevant as far as the business is concerned. Mm-hmm. And while it has made progress, but has it kept pace in terms of being able to proactively understand the requirements of the businesses of which they are a part? I think there is still a fairly massive gap. So it's that proactiveness, right? Okay. HR has been, let's say, in a response state, right? So you tell us what needs to be done and we'll respond to that. From there, yes, we've made a lot of progress. There's no denying that, but I think there's a fair distance to cover to be able to so go ahead and say, hey, this is what we believe the business requires. To be able to sort of get up and say that with a huge amount of conviction, I think that's the gap that they need to cover. Okay. And if you take that overarching statement, then of course, yes, it has become more strategic and so on and so forth. And which is why, that the three-pillar model that you will continue to see that three-pillar model, which is the center of excellence, the service center, and then the, HR business partner. I mean, these three pillars will continue in some shape or form for a fair amount of time to come. And one is, I mean, I'm very aware that I'm generalizing, but what has been slow to change is this overemphasis, and this will vary from market to market, right? So if you go into the North Americas and if you come east, the more you move east, well, not completely eastward, but let's say we look at South Asia, the service part still takes a predominant place. Yeah. And it sucks up a lot of energy. It sucks up a lot of time in the organization. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'll come back again on that. Arvind, any views on this? Your own experience, what has changed most dramatically going forward? What is likely to change moving into a next practice, and what may not change much?
So I think Deepak makes some very good points in terms of how HR has shaped up and what is the opportunity for HR in the future, right? I would sort of suggest that one other paradigm through which one, or one other perspective through which one could try and understand what HR's next could mean or what HR's role could be is, what are the challenges businesses are facing today, right? And Eklavya alluded to some of them when he referenced the book, right? At a high level, it is fair to say that war for talent is not just about recruiting the right people and attracting them, right? It's also about creating the right culture, the right organization design, right? Creating an environment where people will not just have skills for today, because the rate of change of technology and the type of skill sets that people require is going to change, right? We are going to move to a very different type of workplace, right? When we move to the new normal, we are going to move to a very different type of workforce, right? Not everybody is looking for hire to retire, neither employee nor employer.
Sure.
People want flexibility, and not just in where they work from, how they work, what they get paid for, what is their contractual obligations. So I would suggest that the type of challenges businesses are facing today, right, give HR the opportunity to play a far more meaningful role, right? As we appreciate those challenges and as we appreciate those opportunities, we probably get a better appreciation of what HR next could mean, and whether HR next is about different practices, best practices.
Yeah.
As consultants and technicians of the subject, we like to use jargon, but essentially that's how I'd like to look at it.
Sure. So let me ask that question to a practitioner. So Anil, we were afraid you dropped off for a minute, but thankfully you're back. So since we're talking of next practices, let me ask, what is your definition of what is a next practice, and how is it, if at all, different from best practice, or is it just like, consultants like Arvind, Deepak, and me do this semantic business kind of thing,
No, I don't know if I'm the right one to answer this question then, but yes, I would attempt. So yes. So Advait, for me, how do I put it? So see, practice is when we put some idea in terms of application, we act on something, right? And in that sense, we say best practice means something which is the best way of doing it. But then for me, the important question is in what time horizon this is best. Okay, so is it best for 6 months? Is it best for 1 year, 2 years, or it's best forever? And I think if COVID has given us one humbling experience is that there is nothing best forever. So in that sense, there is a practice which we do, which is best in a moment, but then it could best keep me at pace with industry, with my competitors, but it will not take me ahead. I was there was this example when second wave happened in India. Borosil CEO or MD came with this fantastic LinkedIn post about how they will support their employees, right? And then there was a chain of mails. So it's best practice, I think, in that moment, right? But then is this the way to go forever? No. And I think this is where this element of what you call as next practice, or maybe a better word, but for now, next practice comes into the picture. Because for me, next practice is something which is more exploratory, which is not proven in all pockets or in major areas. I think it is something which keeps you ahead of your competitors. Okay, I'll give you an example. In our company, in Forcia, we just finished a strat plan exercise, and we defined what are our product line strategy. From our product line strategy, we are trying to define which are the technology domains will be critical in 5 years from now in electrification of cars. And what we realized, there are significant differences to what we are today and where we should be. Now, we don't know the path to reach there. But we have moved in a practical way. We've initiated a dialogue on how we can translate our future in form of skills, and that's where HR role comes. So I think for me, the next practice in that sense is sort of a discipline imagination. In a disciplined way, you imagine it and then try to find answers. So if I may answer this way.
Anil, good to hear that when this strategy discussion was happening, you got a seat at the table. That itself is the best next practice.
Absolutely. I have always felt good organization put HR very much at par with all functions. It's never a second in line or the after the meeting after meeting kind of a scenario. No. Yes.
Sure. That's very good. It's a very interesting point you mentioned that any thing that happens as a next practice now presumably has a shelf life. If I can paraphrase what you've said, like anything, what's great yesterday might be good today and might be redundant tomorrow. It's the same for any of the HR practices, and a fantastic example you gave about the LinkedIn post from Borosil, because now maybe 200 other companies have done something similar. May not be 2 years and everything, but even if it is like 2 months, that's still leading the way kind of thing. So great, fantastic. Coming back to you, obviously we've gone through very unique times in the last now 18 months. What has changed as far as HR is concerned, especially in this period now? And in your own view, what has changed for the better and what has changed for the worse? I mean, I just, all of us, I'm sure, get these, Ken shots every day, the Ken kind of thing. And today, incidentally, they've talked about, the changing role of HR manager and how it is going to be difficult and the multiple roles HR is playing. And most of the thing that they've said in the article is on the unfortunate side of things because of the last 18 months. So what has changed for good and what has changed for worse for HR and for HR folks, HR managers?
I think one of the things I would think going forward is going to be important is to be able to what we would like to call is win with empathy, right? For organizations, how do they ensure that they are able to win internally among their workforce with empathy, right? And for HR, HR is like the spearhead of that arrow, right? Which is leading a lot of this change. So the demands from HR, right, are going to be much more. And one could say that therefore HR practitioners and people in the HR industry will be stretched to be able to reach out, create that culture, create that environment where the organization is seen as empathetic and yet to continue to win the war in the marketplace, right?
Sure.
So they really have to be that bridge that makes the organization caring as well as successful commercially. Some of the things I think that has changed is employees want to be heard much more.
Okay.
They want to be heard more regularly. The idea of doing an annual survey once in 2 years, point of time sort of sensing, I think that has gone, right? Employees want to be heard more, and therefore that ability to just listen, right, rather than speak more.
Yeah.
Employees are now experiencing as customers, right, extremely high quality experience in whatever they are doing in their personal work. So now they are expecting organizations to almost offer customer grade experience.
Okay.
As well, right? Just getting my payroll slip along on the right time with the right value, getting reimbursements on time. All that is now passe, right? That is not about being able to meet employee experience. Experience is now about customer grade experience. How do you make it easier for the employee and the employer to interact? And I think while there are a host of other things, it's also about creating that, prioritizing things like learning and development, ensuring that the organization realizes that talent is so core, what their future success will look like, that they create enough budgets and create enough space for employers to be able to offer ability to learn new skills, clear career path, right? And what it will mean when you get those skills and how can that accelerate your journey in the organization? Because the last thing I would say is employers are looking for what can my organization offer me, right? And how can it keep me relevant, right? And so those are, I think, some of the things that.
Lovely. Interesting. You mentioned about, and I got reminded of a couple of years ago that book which became very famous by Vineet Nayyar, Employees First, Customer Second. And it is something that what you've just mentioned in terms of HR now suddenly being customer centric and their customers being, obviously their own employees. DG, this, whole thing about talent wars, talent before strategy, employee first, customer second. All this is nice in terms of articles, journals, books. Is this for real? Have you seen it happen anywhere where, HCL, of course, can be an example because he's written a book based on his example. But is it for real? I mean, that's my...
Oh, it is. I mean, you have so many examples. And Eklavya talked about them. But then one might say, hey, these are all sort of examples of businesses that don't belong to this part of the world, but within this part of the world, there are examples where employees first and giving them the customer experience. I like the point that Arvind made, that running those employee satisfaction engagement surveys once every year or once every 2 years. I mean, 10 years ago, I used to tell my clients, throw it out of the bloody window, and they would throw me out of the window because they thought that was the best thing to do at that point in time. And I said, this is useless. I mean, in fact, on a lighter note, I reconnected with folks I knew before I left the country, came back. And they said, you know what, we now remember you told us 10 years ago that stop doing the satisfaction business. In fact, it's causing more dissatisfaction than it'll give. Anyway, so yes, there are lots of examples.
Okay.
But let me be provocative here, right? If I'm not provocative, then I'm not true to my own brand.
Okay.
Right. Yes, changes are happening, but I think, and I'm not sort of sitting on a high horse, and I'm not speaking from a point of view where I know more than the others, but merely as a participant, merely as a practitioner, especially in South Asia. A lot of our fellow colleagues are simply not up to date on the skill sets.
Mm.
And let me give you a very, very simple example. 9 out of 10 conversations that start on trying to understand potential actually end up talking about performance.
Mm.
And I just my jaw drops. In fact, some of my team members says that, DG, your jaw is hanging. So I said, look, I can't bring it too close. I just can't throw it and close it up because I find this to be such a ludicrous conversation that how come you are equating the two things? I mean, think logically, put some science behind your thinking. And I think that's what's missing.
Okay.
And I think that's a big catch-up area. So not just performance potential, but I think across a whole suite. Technology is another example.
Fair enough.
And let me add one more if you give me 2 minutes. And I think
Sure.
my sense, and there is a growing breed of business-oriented HR practitioners who are saying, let's learn from other businesses, other sectors, right? Let's look at banking.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if you look at a DBS or you look at any of these big banks, they have completely reinvented themselves from a first principle basis on 2 parameters, utility and frictionless.
Mm.
Right. So if you look at today, digital banks, what is driving that whole digitalization, if you want to use that word, is what is the utility that my customers want? What's the value? Utility is about value.
Okay.
And how can it be reached to them in the least friction possible?
Yeah. I'll come back to the digitalization part a little later. But before I come to that, going back to what Arvind mentioned, he used the word bridge. I also want to use the word balance because it's not just a bridge between the company and the employees, but also a fair balance between, company priorities, employer priorities, and employee priorities, even in these challenging times. So, question to you, Anil, again from an OD perspective. Arvind did mention about this perhaps would be the best time for investment in L&D, learning and development kind of thing. But on one hand, I've seen, or many companies would be there, I'm sure, where their business has been seriously affected in the last 18 months. And here, the view is that maybe this is the best time to invest in people. How do you balance this out, bridge this or balance this out between business priorities and no budgets, because that's one of the first things where budgets get cut. And what kind of best next practices you think we should have as far as investing in people is concerned?
Yeah, sure. So let me draw a very distant parallel, and then I'll come back to your question. There was a time when we were doing an intervention within our company in one of my previous companies. There, the problem statement the CEO told us was that all my sales guys come back to me saying that we have lost the business and the reason is price. And he said it's never been price. We know that. Yeah. And I think if I draw the same analogy here, when we say L&D, we always say the budget is a constraint.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere after a point in time, including HR, and I think I go back to Arvind's point also, and Deepak's point rather, he mentioned about the skill set, the capability of HR to actually reinvent L&D in a way where it becomes, of course, employee centric, but also business centric. And by that I mean is that in COVID times, we are not doing many classroom learnings, right? It gives us a window to actually move forward and look at L&D in a more scalable way. And that's what we need to do. I mean, we need to look at more e-learning, more virtual reality, all those things into picture. I think we need to go back to the basics of L&D, which good organizations are picking up very fast, which is use mentoring and coaching as a key lever for learning. Today, I think, again, Arvind said listening to employees is key. I think we need to listen to our critical talent a lot more. Have those one-on-one conversations with them so that they feel heard and they being coached about what is the right way to go about things. We are also doing a lot of, there are a lot of crises. So for example, in automotive, we have this semiconductor shortage. The world knows, right?
Yeah.
I think good companies are leveraging the opportunities like this to pick up high potentials, pick up right people, to put them into these challenges. Now that's also learning and development, talent management, right? So for me, instead of classical, that 10% of classroom learning, we need to utilize that 70-20. And trust me, that 70-20 is least expensive and far more impactful in terms of developing your talent, investing in your people. And that to me is the next way to look forward to learning and development.
Sure. That's a great kind of way to sort of utilize this time to the best of kind of thing, and not get confused, like Deepak said, in terms of performance and potential. Like you said, identify your hypods, speak to them, and maybe understand what their needs are, what their requirements are, and hear them out better. That's fantastic. Arvind, coming back to you in terms of we've been discussing about this online thing in today's world. Like Anil mentioned, classroom is not really possible in today's world, even if it was 10% earlier. How do you ensure, and what are the next practices as far as this employee engagement is concerned? How do you ensure that people always carried their work home? I mean, especially the senior people, some of the middle management people. Now, not just the work, the entire office has come home thanks to this online. And all of us have gone through at a different level in terms of schools being online, and suddenly the parents getting exposed to what the teachers are and what is the level or otherwise of their teaching. Same thing is happening when office people now are at home, and the cameras are on and those kind of things. So with this, what are your views in terms of the next practices in terms of employee, I don't want to call it engagement, but employee bonding, or since we are talking of investment in learning and development, how do you ensure that employees remain invested in your company, although they are not physically with you?
I would just start by just sort of quote that I read from some research paper of a Chinese employee saying that my work life has moved from 9 to 9 6 days a week. 0-7, right? I'm sure most of you have heard. So that I thought put it very beautifully in terms of capturing really what has changed for people, right? What it has done for organizations and for leaders is that now you have to display leadership from afar. You're used to being in the same room, communicating. Everybody is in the same environment in the traditional workplace. Now you're talking to people, you don't know what's happening in the background. You can't see them, you can't hear them, you don't know what's happening beyond what you can see in the screen in front of you, right? Not everybody is on the same screen. So it's become really about leading from afar. And I think that therefore means that organizations have to think a little bit more in terms of how they communicate. What is the clear direction they can give? Because people don't get a chance to pick up signals that they would have picked up when they were in an organization. So clearer direction, more open communication, just a respect for the fact that we don't know your world, right? We appreciate you might need flexibility. and it's okay to take off for 1 hour in the day, because we have colleagues in office who join office at 11 o'clock because she's got a 7-year-old or 6-year-old kid who's in school from 9:30 to 11. She obviously won't sit in front of the laptop if her mom is not there or dad is not there, right?
Yeah.
So appreciation for all of that. And I think those are some of the things that organizations need to do. We need to invest a lot in terms of helping managers appreciate what their teams are going through, right? I think it's difficult for managers, right? Really measure productivity. I can't see the guy, right? So how do you ensure that your performance matrices, your KPIs, how do you ensure managers have a better appreciation of what their colleagues could be going through? And I think most importantly, just to acknowledge that we don't yet know what is a silver bullet. There's a lot of test and learn. We are learning from each other. We are learning from
that's a very candid admission. Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Okay. DG, coming back to you, then the point you mentioned about digitization, and what I want to say is, willy-nilly, all of us have had to adopt and maybe adapt to this whole online work from anywhere kind of pattern, and where, like Arvind mentioned, there's not much appreciation in terms of what is my private life. I mean, because many managers' style is, you've come here for the work, and I don't really care what happens at your home, kind of thing. Now, one thing I want to ask you is, in this onset of online and productivity measurement using online tools and HRMS and all those kind of things, and analytics and AI in HR and all kinds of things that we hear. How do you ensure from a next practice perspective that the human element in HR still remains, I dare say, intact, but at least it is there, and it doesn't become just another technology-driven kind of thing? I mean, I'm not belittling the role of technology, but I'm saying, is there still a next practice in terms of ensuring there is a human connect?
Okay, so here's what I have to say. That the human connect is not the prerogative of HR. In fact, the human connect has to be with the business. It's the business, it's the managers.
Yeah.
They have to, and what HR needs to do, or somebody within HR needs to make sure that their business managers understand this.
Yeah.
And there've been far too many stories during the last 18 months or 20 months where HR has been trying to do this and it's backfired. Because backfired is probably a strong word, but it hasn't resulted in the kind of outcomes that they would have expected. The human element has to be with, actually everybody in the organization, from the CEO to the janitor. But since we're talking about HR, I'm saying it's not the prerogative of HR, it is with the business, and I'm repeating myself, it is with the folks in the business. Whether that's ops, commercial, sales, finance, marketing. You see, it's their team members.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's those teams. So if I, as a head of marketing or head of sales, if I'm not concerned about what the heck is happening with my own people, what can HR do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sorry, I don't know if that.
But has that role of HR changed, increased, enhanced because of this work from anywhere kind of situation?
Okay, good question. So in businesses where HR has understood this,
mm-hmm.
right? And not just in the 18 months, I think this needs to predate COVID, right? So even if businesses where people have, HR has been big enough and mature enough to say, hey, this is not my prerogative. They are the ones who post these 18 months or during these 18 months, those HR functions, those leaders have really been very successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And their business, which is the business of HR, has actually got kudos from their consumers, the people who experience HR.
Yeah.
Those who haven't, whether it was pre-18 months or they try to suddenly hustle this thing through the 18 months, they've had a very steep learning curve, and they haven't, got to where they would have where they ought to have got to. So, and a lot of organizations have learned this the hard way, that unless until, because look at it, I mean, there are so many data points out there, Advait. There is this, I mean, like Arvind did, let me also quote somebody, and they said that the new management is your mid-management. So what are they saying? What's the intent behind that? Now you talk about work, what is it? Work from home, work from anywhere, work from Timbuktu, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Now, again, Arvind and both Anil made this point about productivity, metrics, and so on and so forth. If that middle management isn't empowered to decide what is it that they do with their teams and how they organize them and how they, come into shared spaces or they don't come into the shared space, you've got to do that. Yeah. So you actually have to invest, goes back to the point that Anil made, you have to make your people who run our businesses to become more, I don't know, empathetic, to use those words, the human element, and so on and so forth.
Sure. Anil, a little while ago, we did talk of this, dichotomy between, or people getting confused. Deepak mentioned about potential versus performance.
Don't even start that conversation because it'll never finish.
So as somebody who's managing OD and talent at a regional level for a MNC, what are the next practices in terms of ensuring that you're making that right kind of distinction? And like all of you have mentioned, that this is the time to identify your high pots and work on them, listen to them. So what have you been doing? What have you seen others doing in that part of the world, for example?
Yeah, I think, there are, of course, a lot of unfortunate things which pandemic has brought to us, but there are some silver linings, if you ask me. If I talk to some of the business leaders, what they say, that we've been able to see through the organization a bit more because of the crisis. Okay. So whenever we are, for example, I gave you an example of the semiconductor shortage. Now, what it made us do, Advait, is we had control towers right from top to front line. And VPs of the organization were talking to organization across the levels. And we could actually see through talent in real life, working on things, rather than only reading talent profiles where somebody says he's a so-and-so potential or she's so-and-so potential. So actually, when such crises happen, I think there are moments when you need to give opportunity to people to step up. More than often they do it, and that's how you get to know the high potentials, but you also get to know people who are not making the cut. So that's one example. Yeah. Second, I think one distinct behavior, and I go back to, again, maybe at the risk of repetition, but I can't agree more. We have to entrust our business guys to really take this baton. HR cannot do this. So for example, the EVP of my business every 2 weeks devotes 2 hours, and this is religiously every 2 weeks devotes 2 hours to talk to 6 people in a region. And that's a face-to-face conversation for 3 hours, where he would like to know what they are doing, how are they feeling, what's the challenge, so I think that's the kind of commitment the business managers need to make to work with the people. And if you don't do it, I'm sorry, HR do not have the answers. And otherwise, and I like what Arvind also said, Deepak said, that it goes back to pre-COVID. If HR in those times believed their job is to create engagement events, they're doing the same now in form of a yoga day or some day or the other day. Yeah. But then we need to move forward than that. I think that's what I would say.
Going back to what you mentioned, are you trying to suggest that thanks to this, there's a lot of transparency or organizational sort of hierarchy and structure collapsed, and there was visibility in the vertically, and that led to recognition of potential or recognition of talent? Are you trying to say that?
Yes, we experienced that in areas wherever we tried to address the problems by taking bets on people. And we did not have many times we did not have a choice. Okay. I gave you example of the semiconductor. There were other topics. For example, we created regional level forums where, for example, there was a team responsible for how we maintain the safety and well-being for people in China. And we just picked up people, the good guys whom we believed can manage this crisis situation. And we gave them the baton, and we got to know a lot of people in that sense. So yes, I think in a way it has made it more transparent for us.
Sure. Arvind, picking on what Anil just mentioned, one is of this transparency part, and obviously the safety and well-being. And when I say well-being, it is not just the physical, but in today's times, especially because of things are happening around us, is the mental well-being as well. And increasingly, companies are doing a lot of things on that. Two questions: one on the transparency, one on the next practices as far as employee well-being is concerned. Transparency is a double-edged sword. As long as I'm doing good, I want that transparency. The moment I have a bad month, bad week, bad quarter, whatever, I hate that transparency. Your views on that, whether it's going forward, should it continue, or is it a short-term kind of thing thanks to this, and once we come back into the same floor and under the same roof kind of things, that hierarchy will come back again? And second thing is, what's been your experience? What have you been advising? What have you been seeing with your clients in terms of next practices as far as employee well-being is concerned in today's times?
Yeah, I think Advait, transparency increasingly is a one-way street, in the sense that there is very little that organizations can do to avoid being transparent. And has to acknowledge that employees of today are, for lack of a better word, more demanding, right? They are smarter. They have access to more information. It's not just information that your organization officially provides. They make their own assessments of where the firm is headed. And for whether it's good or bad, right? Transparency helps organizations, because especially in tough times, if you're not transparent, you're allowing employees to make their own assessment. Invariably, the assessments they make will be worse than the reality. So I think there is no choice. It has, it is here to stay. On well-being, I mean, if I just look at what our surveys used to show in 2017, 18, 19, lot of intent. Every organization wants to do something for their employees, but always the question mark of, is it worth it, right? How can I do it effectively? They would
sometimes Arvind, they say intent is the worst enemy of action.
Yeah, right. So the organization will set up well-being sessions, right? But the manager won't like his staff to go and participate in them because there's something else. I think that has changed, and I think it's changed in many ways. It's changed because the ecosystem has just evolved so rapidly, right? How you consume well-being has changed. Employees' appreciation of what organizations do in that space has changed significantly, and it's therefore become possible to move forward on the intent with a little bit more vigor. And so I think ecosystem, employees' own perception of how it's valuable, and organizations therefore continue to commit. I think these three have just ensured that it will remain there. Levels could drop, engagement levels could drop. We are going to be multifold from where we were in 2019.
Okay, but it's here to stay. It's here to stay. Yeah, it's okay. DG, any experience from any of your clients you can name, or not, without naming, any next practices you can think of in terms of tangible things people have done from a well-being perspective?
Oh, yes. And I'm essentially echoing what both Anil and Arvind said. So from it being an episodic aspect, right? You create a yoga session, or you create these mindful workshops, to which, as Arvind says, no manager wants to let go, and so on and so forth. I think what has forced businesses, and I'm using the word force thoughtfully and purposely, is to say that, okay, hey, we're going to actually empanel, let's say, whether it's counselors or whether it's mental health experts, and they are available to, and it's just not one person. And again, depending on the size of the company, the geographic spread, all of those variables have to be kept in mind. And these services are available. I mean, go ahead, pick up the phone, send them an email, talk to them, right? So it's from, what I'm saying in other words is from event episodic, it's become structural.
Yeah.
It's got woven into the organization. And there are a lot of organizations that have done that, and they've had to do it. Because working from home, and again, this varies from, let's say, market to market. I mean, you look at the big cities in India, you look at Bombay, Bangalore. I don't know how much work ever gets done in Calcutta, but then Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, in all due respects. Look at what has been a traditional model. People leave their home and go to work, right? So you'll see office space concentrated in a certain square kilometers. And you look at the structure of our houses. These houses, the Indian architecture doesn't support home offices, and especially where you have both the parents, the spouses or the partners working, it doesn't support, so it's taken a toll.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to a bunch of clinical psychologists, which I do because I do share some affinity with that fraternity, well, I wouldn't say the ratio, but the run rate in which separation instances, they've spiked, right? So corporates have had to do this. Otherwise, the risk is too high, and the cost is therefore too high.
So follow-on question for you, because as I mentioned, this is in partnership with NHRDN, and when we say NHRDN members, there's a huge range, people who are HR heads in multinational companies, but not everybody is that. So how have these practices, or what would be your recommendation? How have these practices changed? If you look at large MNC companies, they can afford to do this, etc. But what about these MSMEs, mid-sized companies, 100, 200 employees? What is the role of HR in sort of ensuring employee well-being, and what would be the next practices for these mid-sized companies, 50 to 200, 300 kind of employees?
Good question. So, and I don't know if that, well, okay, so look, the recipe will remain the same in the sense the solution, right? Even the MSMEs, they will have to, in fact, the MSMEs more than the large corporates would have to co-opt their business managers in taking on, the role of also being, so therefore invest, as Anil said, invest your money, spend at least 20 cents of your dollar or whatever rupee in bringing your managers up to speed on, listening and communication, something that Arvind talked about, on becoming more empathetic, understanding their own, their own emotional status and where they are coming from.
Yeah.
And I think that is what the MSMEs should do. More than spending money on sort of team building and all of that sort of snazzy stuff, or for that matter on building skills, which they might have to, functional skills, but do respect this. Leverage your managers, right? You have those people within your own organizations. Enable them. Because hiring, whether it's clinical psychologists, counselors, and good ones, right? Yes, it's a commitment. It's not easy. I mean, in India, there aren't so many regulations, but if you were to go elsewhere, there is a huge regulatory framework which protects those clinical psychologists and the counselors and the insurance and the this and the other. India में वो सब नहीं है, but फिर भी वो expensive है. So leverage your managers and empower them, build their capability.
Okay. Anil, little while we talked about, the office coming home and slightly too much into home because of this online work from anywhere kind of mode. And everybody's talking of these yoga sessions and all those kind of things. And especially on a weekend, a lot of companies are also extending this employee outreach program to the family members. Now, from a best practice, next practice perspective, is it a good thing in the long run? Do you want too much of family involvement? Because, and vice versa. I mean, I remember a TV ad where, they've shown a mother and daughter enjoying their Sunday breakfast, and the daughter gets a phone from her boss, and the mother picks up the phone saying that, look, your office has come home. This is a Sunday morning. sorry, she's not going to take the call. She's having breakfast, or I don't know. Unfortunately forget the product they were advertising, but I remember the ad. Now this kind of thing, is this a good thing going forward? That too much, involving family members, extended outreach program, or do you think from a best practice, next practice perspective, this is short run? This will slightly go away once people come back to offices.
Yeah.
And
So
what's
I will
your company doing on this?
I will put it this way, they say no, excess of everything is bad. So either way, it will not help.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think we need to look at it more in a principal way. So number one, I think I know I'm using a terminology, but just to make a point that from work from home, now we've got into something called as home office. Each one of us, after a point in time of a struggle of 3-4 months, 5-6 months, found one chair which is most comfortable to sit 9 to 6. Found that corner in the house, which is my home office now, right? So we've done those experiments. I think now is a time to look at it a more professional way from an organization standpoint, where organization is saying, find a professional space where you can check in a particular time zone, stay there, in a connected way with your employees. You can do a video call as much as possible. There is a connection. So because it's a home office, I think that's the expectation which we need to honor. At the same time, I think employers, organization need to also be sensitive to the fact that we are in a space which is not their physical office. What I mean by that is, for example, about last month, we were having a call with our US team, and one of our women employees' daughter suddenly came in the video. Now she was busy handling that kid, and suddenly the VP of that, the manager of that employee, he brought his baby, the other VP brought his baby, and suddenly there was a moment of inclusivity where they all felt that, okay, it's not a bad thing. And I go back to what Arvind was saying, that we give a feeling that we understand that there is a family, we are into that space, but not to do to an extent that you get into a Saturday, Sunday. And here I think the key role is that we need to, as leaders, make sure we do some things top down. For example, we need to mandate the checkout times also.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that our employees disconnect also, so that they have a family life. I don't think organization need to say that, okay, bring your family in now, we are one big family and we take care of them. It's good to a point, but after a point, let employees have that space to be with the family. And something like, for example, we said that after 7 o'clock local time, employees are not bound to respond to any mail or call.
Oh, wow.
And this communication mail came from our EVP to everybody.
Okay.
That you are not supposed to, and we defined what is the urgency. We said urgency is when a customer line is stopping.
Yeah.
That's an urgency. If that is not the case, don't respond after a mail after 7 o'clock. And 7 we said because the 12-hour difference between US and China and Japan. Otherwise it would have been. So I think somewhere we need to take ownership and make it informed choice. People can take care of their family also.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. I mean, I go back, I think some time back, there was news about France passing laws that any mail sent on a weekend will be illegal and it's a crime to do that, etc. We will not reach that stage, but it's a very interesting example. DG, you raised your hand.
Just to echo what Anil said, I mean, at Conferry, we have similar things.
Okay.
So, in fact, you will see a tagline in a lot of our emails saying, you please don't feel bound to respond to this email if it is outside your work hours.
Oh, wow.
Because we are working across time zones. So if somebody sends an email to me from the London office on a Friday, whatever, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock India, it means it's 4 o'clock UK time, right?
Yeah.
If he thinks that I'm going to, bounce around and send a reply back, no, it's not mandated.
Sure.
So, this just is an example. So that is where.
Can I stop you there and ask you a small question? Is it the Indian thing that India mein chalta hai, wo respond karega hi? Is that thing?
No. I think wo stereotype hai. So right.
Sure.
We Indians give it back to. I hope this doesn't get. Don't you worry about that.
Okay, I think Anil in a different context made that too much of anything is not good, and I realized that too much of spending time, although it is good, but we have to sort of be disciplined about the time just reached our time. So one last question, I'll start with you, Arvind. One more thing when we're talking of employee well-being, one important factor to that is that more often than not, all humans are social animals. And one good thing about being to office under one roof, four walls or whatever, is being in a team. I'm not just saying about gossip and water cooler and coffee kind of thing, having dabbas and lunch together, but actually working in a team where you are physically close to each other. And now that's becoming rare and scarce, and not many people have come back to office. Now, given this, what would you recommend in terms of a next practice? So how do you ensure that we still have an effective teamwork? And I'm not looking at productivity, I'm looking at effectiveness, not efficiency, in these times. And what's your recommendation in terms of how one should go about it?
I think it is a couple of things that I may have mentioned, but I would just sort of reiterate. One is to ensure that team sizes are smaller. So there's an ability to get to know each other slightly better, right, rather than large teams. So do that. I think there's also the need to sort of hear and so do you try and create some interest groups and let people decide and let the organization support some of those, right? You don't necessarily connect with people only in your team, but now because you're remote, you can have the ability to connect with almost anybody. But what do I connect on? Right? So can I do something like that? And generally to try and see how technology evolves. And I think technology is evolving and it will have a large role to play. And how can we harness technology, right, to be able to create that connectivity? And I think it's very important to keep an eye on what technology enables, right?
Okay.
Monitor, but to enable that connectivity.
Sure. So your mantra is keep the team small and let them bond with each other on variety of topics for work and outside of work in terms of special interest as well.
Yeah, and there could be multiple teams, right? My work team, my special interest group team could be different.
Yeah, you have a sort of cross tab between teams and interest. Lovely. Thank you. Anil, any last words on this in terms of the teams?
No, I think one, absolutely, that reduce the team size. Second, I think one thing which is very basic but has worked wonders in is set routines for one-on-ones. And it may look very cliche, but all the managers who think they have been able to work very collaboratively with their team members, they have their team meetings, but after that, the managers are actually setting weekly, fortnightly one-on-ones where they talk to each and every team member for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. How are things? What's happening? What are you being challenged for? What support you need? Those conversations are doing wonders. I'm a recipient of that. I'm also doing it. I can tell you this is a big game changer. Second, I think use of collaboration tools, what Arvind said, that we need to now expand, looking at Mural, Slack, all these kind of collaboration tools, and help our managers facilitate conversations virtually. That how do you balance between a participant and a present? Because on a screen, you just have a presentation, but you forget the participants who are also there. So how do you do that? So facilitation. And third, again, basic, try to have more and more video conversations. I know it cannot be forceful, but as much as possible, connect on a video. It can be painful just to talk to a screen after in a 2-hour meeting. So these are some of the basics which we need to put in place. And then bring back people to work wherever there is a collaborative topic of innovation. Because I feel after a point, the workplace will become a place of collaboration and innovation. The cubicles may not remain.
Brilliant points. Yeah. Deepak, last word before we wind up. You're on mute, Deepak, and Anil mentioned about one-on-one. So, quick question to you: can people actually take time out of their busy calendars for these conversations?
I mean, I'll only go by my own practice and the practice that we have at Confer. Yes, we do these one-on-ones.
Okay.
Right. And I think just 3 statements. The point that Anil made in very short time. I mean, hopefully third wave will be not as devastating as what we had earlier in the year.
Sure.
There will be this coming back to the office. The spaces will get sort of configured, right? They'll become more collaborative spaces. So that change is going to happen. We are not going to be working from home forever. And we've seen, companies making those big statements and then finally doing a complete 180 on them. And the reason that's happening is because of one simple statement, or one simple fact actually, which is that social connectivity, right, is highly correlated with collaborative productivity. Right, and I think BCG and just about everybody, right? Why single out BCG?
Yeah.
In fact, even organizations, they've done their own surveys, they've done their own sort of listening to the employees, and that's what's come out. That's what sort of filtered up, social connectivity. So yes, there are constraints where you do that over Zoom or whatever other media, and we talked about collaborative tools. But eventually, yes. Look, this is a very fluid situation. I mean, when this whole pandemic started, we didn't know which way to look. People say, oh, this is the end of big, infrastructure, office complexes, and so on and so forth. But it's not going to be the end of everything.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Great. I had, more things to ask, but we have to be mindful of the time as well. It's a Friday evening after all. And so let me sort of take this opportunity to once again thank all of you for sparing your time and great insights on this important topic in terms of next and best practices in today's times. So once again, Arvind, Deepak, Anil, thanks for joining in to our Between the Lines session. Thanks National HRD Network again for partnering with us. Our next session we scheduled on 17th of September evening 5:30 same time, and we are going to talk on what we are going to call career conundrums. So it's going to be a different book, different topic, and as good experts panelists as we can have, and we've had for last 60 programs. So thank you once again, all of you, and good evening. And thanks for all the participants who stayed back till now. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Thank you very much. You have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Deepak. Bye, Arvind. Thank you.
Bye.